All right, welcome to official week 2, but week 3 of Introduction to Philosophy. Just to give you all like a recap of where we're at in the class and how we're gonna approach today's content. We started with what is the value of philosophy in general, which gave us kind of a sense of what the practice of philosophy is supposed to be all about at all. And last week we read Plato's Apology, so the famous trial of Socrates, the defense for his life against Meletus and Anytus, the eventual conviction and his death, where we get the famous quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living, that it's better to spend every day in pursuit of questioning virtue and those other good things that make life examined and thus worth living." So we got first a sense of what philosophy should be about, and then we see the life of philosophy really like become born for the very first time in Plato's Apology, and we see how that might look in practice of the examined life, asking questions, discovering the truth, or that behind every certainty there is a whole lot of uncertainty, in fact, and this makes people who are certain of themselves very angry. And it's in this tradition that we see Descartes really flourishing as a philosopher, as a scientist, mathematician, really polyglot of disciplines, polymath of the sorts. He sort of existed back in the day when you could know everything. This is before there was such a thing as science, right? As like geology and biology. I mean, they existed, but really they were just called the natural philosophies, right? And then there were moral philosophies, and usually you'd have someone who's a moral philosopher or a natural philosopher, but then you have these like super geniuses like Descartes, who are both. He's a natural philosopher and a moral philosopher. And the world in which Descartes exists in the 1700s is one that has been dominated for 1500 years by Aristotelian thought, which is good science. It was the very first science, in fact, but incomplete, and in so far as it had existed for so long, had become dogmatic and rigid and structured and backed by the Catholic Church, which since the fall of the Roman Empire had become the dominating power in the Western world. And around the time of Descartes, we see Copernicus and Galileo, Tycho Brahe, all of these like scientists in the sense of scientists as we would understand them today, making discoveries and thinking in new ways in this form of like mechanical science that is challenging and pushing forward or really against and forward the old way of thinking. This made many people angry. The Spanish Inquisition is a big problem. Nobody expects them, but nobody wants to deal with them when they come unexpected. And Descartes historically fits into this story as a unifier between the old way of thinking and the new way of thinking. And through the meditations creates this capacity for the old, rigid, stodgy, dogmatic thinkers to accept the new mechanical sciences. And this is one reason that Descartes is important. He's also important culturally, in that when you think of a philosopher, right, like in the same sort of way you might think of a dog, like what is the image prototypically that comes up in your mind is, I don't know, like a golden retriever or a lab or something, right? Like four-legged, kind of medium-haired dog, medium-sized, right? You have like a concept in mind of what this is about. When you think of a philosopher, we very much often think of Descartes' character that he paints in the Meditations. Man sitting by the fire, contemplating the meaning of life and existence and everything in between. Armchair philosophy is a phrase we have now. All of that is sort of a satire and a farce on Descartes, who did it perfectly the very first time. And, because it was so iconic and perfectly represented, we have, all of the sort of spin-offs of that cultural concept. Descartes is also, interestingly, a literary figure, as I interpret him. And so I think it's important to pair him with Plato in this respect as well. Last week, we talked about Plato and the Sophists, right? The philosophers versus the sophists, the rhetoricians who were interested in making the worse arguments sound the better, though Socrates was accused of that. Philosophers would talk about like the truth, and the sophists would talk about how to talk about the truth, right? How to make what you say pretty to be a good politician or lawyer, etc. Now, Descartes is doing the same sort of thing that Plato is doing in unifying these two forms of expression. What we read in the Meditations is not just a philosophical inquiry, is not just a process of argument and searching for answers and truth, but also a story that Descartes sets himself up as the main character of a narrative. And we get human moments, little human asides, emotions that bleed through and give body and character to an otherwise ingenious philosophical argument, which is something that's very much missing from contemporary philosophy today. Contemporary philosophy models itself today off of scientific papers, right? So very much devoid of humanity and very much all about like fact and rigor, which has its virtues. But what we see in Descartes is something very different, something literary and as well as philosophical, which I adore it. It's awesome to read. It's a joy, even if like you don't get the arguments or disagree with him, at least what you feel for him is compassion and sensitivity to his intellectual plight, because he characterizes that human experience so well. So much like Plato humanizing philosophy through the form and power of rhetoric. So this is sort of Descartes. Let's look at the man a little more closely as we move forward. Descartes is called the father of modern philosophy for all of the aforementioned reasons, right? He is sort of where modern philosophy begins. And modern philosophy is to be distinguished from this Aristotelian tradition, which had been persisting for the last, since Aristotle into 16 whatever. Descartes is insofar as he's able to make this transition from the Aristotelian way to the new modern way, invites everyone into a new form of thought, and so is called the father of modern philosophy. If you took a math class ever, you probably recognize this thing, right? The Cartesian coordinate plane. Can you guess who invented it? It says, yeah, right there. Yeah, Descartes invented. Cartesian is Descartes, right? Descartesian. So the Cartesian coordinate plane. This is just to sort of emphasize the fact that he wasn't just a philosopher, right? He wasn't just thinking about, what am I and what is thinking and what's body and mind and all this. No, he's like doing real mathematical proofs as well that these polymaths, these super geniuses were doing everything. He was also a cognitive scientist. He is one of the first originators of a theory of vision. So he was doing like dissection of human bodies after they died, to find out like what the physical mechanisms of the mind were all about. And so he like wrote a whole, it's called the Optics book on how vision is supposed to work. That's both like philosophy of perception as well as like scientific inquiry. And this is his drawing. He drew this. There's a bunch of cool drawings in his work. So like he's kind of an artist too, which is cool. And yeah, what this drawing represents is the idea that what your left eye sees is processed in the right side of the brain, and what your right eye sees. Like, so if I'm looking over here, it's processed in the opposite side of my brain. And Descartes was figuring that out, like 500 years ago. It's pretty awesome. So Descartes, man, the myth, the legend. He was also an astronomer and a geologist. Here's his sketch of the layers of the Earth. The guy was just on top of everything. So, rise of the new science. We've talked about a little bit of it's called scholasticism, the Aristotelian way of thinking, very much dominated by church dogma. So the Catholic Church sort of appropriates Aristotelian thinking. So Aristotle's way before Jesus was around, right? And especially Peter and Paul and everybody, made the church. So the church appropriates Aristotelian thinking because that's like the science of the day and the important way of thinking well. But like with any science, it becomes outdated, right? That we become more precise in how we experiment, how we measure, and how we think. And this requires edits to our systems, our schemas of thought. And we were at a sort of critical point around the time of Descartes, where the old form of thinking was insufficient for the new data that we were collecting. So as Descartes says, some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted into my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary once in the course of my life to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations if I wanted to establish anything at all that the sciences that was stable and likely to last. So what's Descartes telling us here? Well, he's clarifying that nobody's wrong or ignorant. He's not blaming a whole school of thought of being wrong. He's saying, look, I've believed all sorts of things. Like if my set of beliefs and my set of like what I consider knowledge, it's like a barrel. There have been some rotten apples in that barrel, but mostly they've been fine. And it's not anybody's fault. I've just believed some false things. So what I want to do is figure out which of those beliefs are false. This is to be contrasted with one of Descartes' contemporaries, Galileo. Galileo was not charitable or democratic in his experiments, his expression of support for the new mechanical science. He said that you're all stupid for thinking the way that you do. The fact of the matter is this, and then he was threatened with death and put under house arrest, and he never published anything again, maybe posthumously, but he never published anything again for fear of death, right? One of the first lines of the Myth of Sisyphus, right, Albert Camus, says like, you know, the truth of the world isn't worth the man's convictions for his life, right? Something like that, which is just to say that like Galileo was more attached to survival than to the truth of, you know, like mechanical science. But really, it wasn't the truth or the new data that really irked the church. In Galileo's case, it was his being bullheaded and inflammatory. Descartes has the same exact project. He wants to say, no, you know, like Earth revolves around the sun, and matter is not made up of corpuscles. That's a Wikipedia for you, corpuscles. And that we can measure the exchange of forces and heat through the movement of molecules and matter, this sort of thing, right? So what Descartes is doing is saying, look, everybody makes mistakes, and I'm one of you. We all make mistakes, and I'm going to investigate in myself what those mistakes are, and whatever we come up with is what I'll have come up with, and hopefully you're on board with this as well. So he's not saying you're stupid and wrong, but he's saying I've been stupid and wrong, so I want to figure out what's been going on. So his goal here, as he says, is to find a foundation upon which he can make sure that whatever else he comes up with is stable and likely to last, right? So what he's looking for is a ground upon which he doesn't have to worry about his barrel of beliefs having rotten apples in them, right? What he wants is a barrel that is immune to rot. He wants a foundation such that any belief that stacks upon that foundation will be perfect support for any other belief, and there won't be any cracks or crumbling in between. Is this a possible pursuit for Descartes? He doesn't know yet, but this is what he's after. This is the goal of the Meditations. Okay, so why is he after this? What's like the philosophy behind this inspiration? The well accepted, at least like at a naive sort of level, when you think of what knowledge is justified true belief, JTB, right? So what you want is to have a belief, some mental state, some object of mind that affirms a proposition, right? So affirms some fact or state of the world, some feature of abstract relations, whatever it is, right? You need to have some kind of cogent, coherent proposition this piece of paper is white would count as a proposition. 2 + 2 = 4 is a proposition, right? So you need it to be a belief. Knowledge can't be like some intuitive feeling that like without any sort of content. Now you need to like have something that you can like write down, so to speak, as being true. The belief can't be false, right? Like if I said this paper is blue, it's not blue, clearly. So if I said, I know that this paper is blue, you'd say you're a crazy person, right? So the belief, this proposition that affirms something about the world, affirms it truly, right? It is actually the case that the paper is white, that the content of the belief hooks in to the features of the world as we experience it or as it really is. And importantly, your true belief must be justified. So for instance, if I said that the 38th digit of pi is 7, I have no idea, actually. Let's just say that it turns out that that's true, that the 38th digit of pi is in fact 7. I actually have no idea. So I can have a belief that it is 37. It could be true that that it is 7, that the 38th digit of pi is 7. But I don't have a justification for it. I don't know it. I couldn't tell you why I believe that. I haven't ever written out pi to 38. I haven't memorized that many digits of pi, right? So in order to like robustly know something, it's not enough that you believe it, that the belief is true, but you also must be able to give reasons, right? The game of truth and knowledge is about giving and asking for reasons. And if we don't have reasons or justifications, then our true beliefs, though they're true, we don't have the right sort of structure to assert that we know them. It might be an accident, in fact, that our belief corresponds to truth. And so for knowledge, at least at this very basic kind of naive level. And when I say that, I don't mean that like there are more sophisticated versions of knowledge that are better. There are, but not necessarily better. There are plenty of other sophisticated definitions of knowledge out there. If you took an epistemology course, you'd pretty much just study like what are the problems with the justified true belief model of knowledge, and how do we like add to it or get around it or whatever. But just at like sort of when you think of what knowledge is, this is at least what it probably should be, something like justified true belief. Good, so we need reasons. And science, again, is all about giving reasons, right? So you collect data, you tell a story about that data that's plausible, that interprets it, and you come up with a conclusion. Your conclusion is the belief. You hope that it's true because you've had a well-collected set of data that's peer-reviewed, and the justification is your study design, the paradigm under which you've collected that Excel spreadsheet worth of data. But there's a problem for this understanding of knowledge, which is the regression of justification. Okay, so what is the regression problem justification? Why should we accept some conclusion, or in this case, a belief? And the answer is, well, because of X. So if you were to tell me, or if I were to tell you this paper is white, I believe that this paper is white, and it's true that this paper is white, and I'm justified in believing that this piece of paper is white because look, it's white. That my reason is like some perceptual fact about the paper, that the color of it is what we normally call white or something. So I'm giving a reason for the belief that I have. Now, why should we accept that reason as itself something true that can stand in the relation to the original belief in order to justify it? What gives us the justification to verify our first belief, right? Well, some other reason, right? Because every belief requires a justification, which is itself a further belief, which itself, in order to count as like knowledge and thus stand in the right sort of relation to make our original belief count as knowledge, should itself be justified, right? And so we should begin to see like the problem of regression here. So if I'm accepting X as a justification for my original belief, and X is justified by Y, then what justifies Y? And what justifies the justification for that? So we should see this regression all the way back. It keeps going. Where does knowledge begin? Where does justification begin? And this is what Descartes is looking for. When Descartes says, I I had to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. This is the problem that he's contending with. This is the problem that inspires him to delete everything, at least hypothetically for a couple of days. At least in the narrative of the story, a couple of days. I don't know if you wrote it all at once or whatever, but the idea is that, look, if my foundation, that ground upon which I'm building up my system of beliefs, has some unjustified X, Y, Z, or whatever N plus belief, then the whole system is liable to crumble. And then I lose everything. And so I need to get rid of everything in order to start from a firm and solid foundation where there will be no liability for seepage, breakage, etc. Great. We need a foundation. And this is often called Descartes' methodological foundationalism. So foundationalism is just like a position in epistemology. That's a kind of theory about what can make knowledge knowledge, or make a belief knowledge, or like make some epistemic mental state. Epistemic means like epistemology is the study of knowledge. So when I say epistemic, I mean like the some feature to do with knowing. Episteme is knowledge in Greek, so epistemology, right? So foundationalism is an epistemological position where you say, in order for anything to count as knowledge, it must be justified at some point in the chain of justification by a firm, unshakable foundation. There's other views like coherentism, where you say, like, as long as there's a coherent net of justification, you don't need any solid foundation. You just need a belief to fit within a sufficiently tight series of beliefs. And then there's like virtue epistemology. There's all sorts of different views about this, but Descartes looking for a foundation, and his methodology is, again, the like destroy it all. So when we think of foundationalism with respect to epistemology and belief and knowledge in this, we can think of a building. If you're going to build a building, you're going to build your castle on a sand hill, it's going to crumble, right? In order to get a castle built, a house built that will stand forever and ever and ever, time immemorial, you need it to be set in strong concrete on strong stone, on bedrock. And it's upon this foundation that we can see at the bottom here of this picture that you get your superstructure of the rest, like the roof and the rooms and the floors and stuff. So this is like an analogy between a system of belief and a house. What we're looking for is a foundation upon which we can build a superstructure of beliefs that's firm and unshakable. So the foundation for a system of belief like the one that Descartes is attempting to construct would be things like principles, axioms, postulates. So if you take a logic class or math class, you might know a little bit about theorems and axioms and postulates. They're sort of like your base simples, right? The most irreducible, simple truths that combine together in different ways to produce other axia, right? So if you were to read like Euclid's geometry, you would have a certain number of basic axia that reorganized and combined together gave you all of the truths about triangles and squares and circles, but not spheres, etc. All of basic like arithmetic and mathematics, it can be proved through basic logic. So there's 3 axia for all of basic arithmetic. If phi, then if phi, then psi. If phi, then if psi, then chi, then phi. And if not phi, then not, let me think of it. If not psi, then not phi. Then if not psi, then not phi, chi, something like that. Those 3 axia are enough to do all of your basic mathematical calculations. If you take like a 3000 level logic course, you'll probably learn what those are. I wasn't ever very good at math, but I really like logic. I think it's just like when you take out the numbers and you put in Greek letters, it makes more sense to me. If that's you as well, then I encourage you to take a logic class. They're a lot of fun. It's like puzzle solving, basically. You're doing fun Sudokus with Greek letters and learning the very basics of inference and intuitive principles of reason. Anyways, these are the sorts of things that might serve as a foundation, right? So you get these three principles, then you get like 2 and 2 equals 4 from that. Those three sets of Greek letters, which represent rules of inference, rules of reason, you get all of the other interesting, like, multiplication tables and stuff. And it's from those three unshakable principles that you get a superstructure of things like multiplication tables, the superstructure of beliefs. So the superstructure would be like proofs and theorems, where you're developing new formulations of those original foundational principles by reorganizing them, mixing them together, etc. So if I had like a foundation that said like blue is a color and squares have internal angles adding up to 360 degrees, I could like recombine those two foundational truths to say this blue square has internal angles up to 360 degrees, something like that, right? Where you get a new belief that combines the two foundational ones and is justified because it refers back to the truth of those original foundational beliefs. This is the kind of thing that we want, and we want it to be unshakable. We want it to be unflappable. We want it to be incontrovertible. We don't want it to have any cracks, no rotten apples, etc. Okay. So as Descartes says, these are the conditions upon which a satisfactory foundation will work. So in order for knowledge to be perfect, it must be deduced from first causes. Thus, in order to set about acquiring it, and it is this activity to which the term to philosophize strictly refers, and that's Descartes' definition of philosophy. Take it or leave it. We must start with the search for first causes or principles. These principles must satisfy two conditions. First, they must be so clear and evident that the human mind cannot doubt their truth when it attentively concentrates on them. And secondly, the knowledge of other things must depend on them, in the sense that the principles must be capable of being known without knowledge of these other matters, but not vice versa. Next, in deducing from these principles the knowledge of things which depend on them, we must try to ensure that everything in the entire chain of deductions which we draw is very manifest. Okay, so I've highlighted the important parts of this complicated definition. What we're looking for in a epistemological foundation, according to Descartes, are these three conditions. First, that our foundation must be derived from first causes, first principles. These are the things like axioms, right? That you can reduce no further. So if I can say that I believe that this paper is white because I know what whiteness is and I know what paper is, then there's a further fact about that belief, namely what whiteness is and what paper is, upon which that belief is justified. A first principle is a true principle that depends on nothing else. That itself has no justification, but justifies everything else indubitably, unflappably, right? Completely. So first cause is something like your axia. Second is a kind of existential epistemic condition. It's not just like a metaphysical feature of the system, but of how we view that object, right? So it's kind of like human a little bit, which I think is kind of interesting, that what matters for foundation is not just what it is without humans that justifies belief, but like how we as humans like understand the world, which is that the human mind cannot doubt their truth. And this will be important at the very end when we talk about clear and distinct ideas. So, just have that buzzing in the back of your head. But the idea here is that you can't look at a first cause or a first principle and think, am I totally sure about this? No, that it's important for the foundation that these first principles be indubitable. They be completely clear and free of doubt. The human mind, when it has contemplated them fully, cannot help but to affirm and assert their truth. This is condition 2. And then the third, that these principles must be capable of being known without knowledge of other matters. This is, again, sort of like a reiteration of the first cause sort of thing, just to say that those beliefs do not rely on any further fact. So our principles of foundationalism, what will justify knowing something for Descartes, is that they're based on indubitable or free from uncertainty first causes. these first causes are the original source of justification and can be found at the beginning of inquiry. So we can start in the middle. We don't need to like prove the whole world from these principles. We can start in the middle, just so long as those beliefs trickle back down to foundations. That's enough. And finally, these foundations are self-evident, that they cannot otherwise be justified. They simply justify themselves. And so this is what our foundation should look like. So an example of a foundation, an axia for Descartes is like something can't come from nothing. This is supposed to be, Descartes gives this something can't come from nothing as an example of a self-evident first principle that's indubitable. We can't help but to think that something can't come from nothing, right? There's no creation ex nihilo. And a superstructure based on the idea of something can't come from nothing is that body is extension, meaning that like there's physical form in three-dimensional space, and mind is intention, that it thinks things, right? And we can get these, we will get these as we see later on through the narrative of the meditations. These beliefs come about from an addition of foundational principles like the no creation ex nihilo. So I'll pause here for just a second. Does anybody have any questions about like foundationalism or like the three principles that establish foundations? Or are we like comfortable with these ideas so far? You know, any thoughts, concerns, or comments? Okay, then we will move on. So again, coming back to the old science, now we're like back into the world that Descartes is inhabiting at the time that he's coming up with these ideas. The foundation of the old science was based on authority and tradition and sense knowledge, that if Aristotle said it, it must be true. And if you disagree with Aristotle, that's going to be a problem with me. And tradition, that it has always been true that you know, God created the world perfectly such that every organism has its perfect place in its niche and in its environment, and there is no change. That why would God create something perfect and then change it? Because any change from perfection would be to lose perfection, therefore no evolution. So there's this tradition of thinking this way. And if you think outside of the way that tradition has established the set of beliefs, then you are a rogue and you are to be punished by the Inquisition. And sense knowledge is incredibly important for the scholastic way of thinking, and is really the sort of real kicker for people like Galileo and Descartes. Galileo like discovers gravity by dropping a ball from a moving horse, and then dropping it from like a still, like he's just standing there, and finds that they like fall at the same time, and so is able to like prove that gravity is a thing. And so this idea of like sense knowledge being the end all be all of scientific inquiry does come from Aristotle, who, you know, in the ancient Greek world didn't have a microscope or you know, like precise measuring tools at all. He just sort of like looked at the world. He looked at plants and at animals and said, hey, they kind of do this stuff and it kind of works like this. And for all intents and purposes, at a really rough level, Aristotle was right. Now, if you, from the perspective of a naive worldview that is imprecise in its measuring and in its thinking about how the world works, Aristotle's spot on and a genius. Now, from the more refined perspective that we have 2,000 years later, Aristotle was wrong about just about everything he said about like biology and geology stuff. And so yeah, I think it's like an important caveat. Like Aristotle invents science by looking at the world, and that's amazing, right? We are standing on the shoulders of giants, and Aristotle, no giants. He is the shoulders, right? Without measuring tools, sensing, just looking at the world, he comes up with a system for how the world works. And by the time, you know, 1650 rolls around, we kind of like have figured out how to do science better, and then we're coming up with different answers. And sense knowledge is not, it turns out, a very satisfactory way to measure the world, that the senses are imperfect, that when a stick goes in water, it's not actually bent, right? It stays straight. Do you have a question? No. So the old foundations of the old science, the Aristotelian scholasticism, are based on this. But for Descartes, these foundations are no good. We need an unshakable foundation just because it's traditionally believed, or because authority says so, because like it's the word of God or the word of the Pope or the word of the king or whatever, or because I felt it or saw it that way. That's not enough. You gotta have like justification, robust justification, and not any justification will do. It has to be the right sort, right, based on first principles, etc. The foundation Descartes' looking for is self-evidence, indubitability, and first principles. So what can stand as this kind of unshakable belief? How do we get rid of the superstructure that might have the rotten apples or the cracks in the foundation or whatever? Well, we use skeptical arguments. So Descartes' skepticism is his tool of wiping away everything that could be messed up and false and wrong. He doesn't know what's what. He's going to pretend like I can't tell the difference between my certainty that 2 and 2 is 4 and that a stick looks bent when it's in water. I'm just going to get rid of the whole bunch and then restart from nothing. And the way that he does this restarting is through skepticism. Now, it's important to know, really, really important, Descartes doesn't actually doubt everything. He's using a universal doubt. He's using skeptical arguments as a tool to build back knowledge. His ultimate goal is science and knowledge, and like to be able to say things that he can be certain of. Sometimes Descartes gets saddled with, oh, well, he kind of doubted everything away, didn't he? And, you know, like you didn't believe anything because he thought there was an evil demon tricking all of us. And said, no, these are all like tools, thought experiments. They're methods for the ultimate goal of having real beliefs. So the skeptical argument is an important and essential tool, but it's not the end of what Descartes is doing. Descartes isn't a skeptic, really at all. He's not a skeptic. At least he's only a skeptic methodologically. But in the end, he ends up holding all sorts of beliefs. Okay, so the method of doubt is what we call this process. So Descartes' method of doubt. Throughout my writings, I've made it clear that my method imitates that of the architect. When an architect wants to build a house which is stable on the ground, when there's sandy topsoil over underlying rock or clay or some other firm base, he begins by digging out a set of trenches from which he removes the sand and anything resting on or mixed with the sand, so that he can lay his foundations on firm soil. In the same way, I began by taking everything that was doubtful and throwing it out, just like the sand. And then, when I noticed that it is impossible to doubt that a doubting or thinking substance exists, spoiler alert, I took this as the bedrock upon which I could lay the foundations of my philosophy. So this is a quote of Descartes reflecting on the process of the meditations. And so with all of this in mind, we are going to play a game. PSDTKTWDTKLFO. Philosophy students, do they know things? What do they know? Let's find out. So we'll probably do more than 120 seconds because a bunch of us are online. So we'll, I don't know, like 3 minutes maybe. Come up with one thing you know. This is your task. You have 3 minutes to do it. Come up with one thing you know. And come up with at least one reason or a justification that explains how you know that thing, okay? And I'll do my damnedest to show that you don't actually know it qua the standards of Descartes, okay? So again, the goal is to come up with something that you feel certain that you absolutely know, that is indubitable, that is maybe like a first principle to you or whatever, right? Something that you know, and I will do my best to doubt it. And I haven't been stumped yet. I've been doing this a lot of years, and I have not been stumped yet, but that doesn't mean that I can't be stumped. So I'll be very excited if you come up with something that, you know, flips me out and I have no answer for. I'll be pedantic, but that's kind of the game. So anyways, I'm going to break you guys up into groups. Again, the rules: come up with one thing you know and one reason that you know it. And let's see. How do we do breakout groups? Pause there. All right, welcome back. So let's play. Philosophy students, do they know things? What do they know? Let's find out. And let me share the screen again real quick so we get this in front of us. right, who wants to go first? What do you know? And why do you know it?
I can go first.
Thanks.
It was me and Brian. We talked about how I know that I exist because I'm existing right now.
You know that you exist because you're existing right now.
Yeah, I feel like I know what that is. I don't know.
Okay.
That's just what we got.
So there's two ways that this answer is halfway cheating. It's halfway cheating first because it may in fact be what's called a tautology, which is something that's vacuously or trivially true. So it's sort of like saying X equals X, right? And what a tautology does is it doesn't prove anything because it doesn't give you any further fact. So I could say blargins are blargins, and I know that because they're blargins. And that would be true because every object of the proposition about blargins corresponds to itself. But it gives you no capacity to reason about like what the heck a blargin is supposed to be or what it means for that to equal itself. And so a tautology is a kind of fallacy in Now, it's also halfway cheating because it's kind of like Descartes' answer, but I'll see what I can do. So I'll be, this is like kind of an exercise in charitability, which is like an important way to treat ideas in general. It should be like one of the virtues, hopefully, that you take away from the class is conceptual charitability. So expressed as is, I know I exist because I'm existing right now, could very well be interpreted as a tautology, but in a more charitable light, what I'm going to do is like try to give it its best legs, which would be to say, I know that I'm existing, and I know this because the activity of existing right now has certain properties or features that are the reason that provide that give sensibility of this proposition that I'm existing. And that wouldn't be a tautology, like it's still kind of close, but it gives you something. So if that's the reason, can you explain a little bit more about what those properties or sensibilities are that give you a sense of existence? What is it that you're experiencing that makes you have that idea of like, I know I'm existing?
Just the fact that I'm breathing. I guess you could say I'm breathing right now. I'm like, my brain is like aware that I'm actually doing something right now, like listening to the Zoom, like I'm actually here doing this and I'm in this world right now.
You think, therefore you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, like halfway cheating because it's Descartes. So I know that I'm existing right now. This is a good one. And if you're gonna play Descartes, I guess I can too. So here's my answer. And again, I'm gonna be pedantic. The goal, like the win condition for me is to make, it doesn't have to be plausible. It just has to be minimally possible that doubt can be like wedged in to the space between reason and proposition, between belief and justification. Okay, so you have these sensations of breathing, of your mind being active, of all of this being sort of centrally located, right? Like chalk outline of the, murder victim, like that's like where your corporeality begins and ends, or at least like emanates from or whatever, okay? And that there's a certain set of sensibilities of base actions, digestion, breath, etc., from which we infer that there is a unity to this corporeality, this chalk outline, okay? And I'll go two directions. One is where we'll study in 2 weeks, Hume's problem of identity. That what Hume says is that everywhere I have impressions of individual entities, features of my experience, but nowhere do I have an impression of their unity. So I can have an impression of breath. I can have an impression of digestion. I can have an impression of spatial location. I have individual units of impressions. But what is the impression of that which unifies all of these units? What is my sense of that sort of glue that's supposed to hold it all together? So I say, I am this unified corporeal entity that exists, but all I really have as evidence for that are individual units of experience. But I don't have evidence of that thing in between. I infer it. I imagine it, as Hume says, that we employ, we take a step away from deducing from the individual elements, and we sort of ad hoc tie them together. But nowhere in the like physical fact of our experience is there this metaphysical spooky glue that's supposed to hold it all together. This is some further fact beyond the actual experience of our being. Now, that's one way of doing it, which would be to sort of say that you have all these individual units, but nothing sort of, no real evidence of the glue holding them together, except maybe probability that if all of these things hold together, it's more likely that there is a unified thing holding it together. Now, there's another way of going, which is kind of like a move towards solipsism-ish. And it's also a bit like what Descartes does with his evil genius. So if you read, this should be a little bit familiar. The idea here would be to say, there is the possibility that we're in a simulation. We're all in the matrix, right? And you ain't Neo. You are, floating in a pod, getting the goop sucked out of you so that the robots have energy, which, makes no actual mechanical sense, but hey, that's how she goes in the movie. So the idea here would be a very convincing simulation that allows you to be free, remain free from doubt, and thus like take the, what is it, the red pill or the blue pill? Why not both? That keeps you from eating the pills and escaping this reality, is also encoding in the experience a sensation of individuality, of existence, of a surety in one's place and the sense of one's being. Now, if it is possible that you, as whatever this is, this thing that breathes and senses and has a brain and stuff, is really just a fabrication, a very convincing fabrication, if that's at all possible, which it seems to be, like we have a movie about it, 4 movies now, then it may not be true, right? You may just be the simulated response of certain supercomputers bouncing back and forth, trying to convince you of some kind of unity that you actually aren't. Okay, that was close. I was kind of worried about that one. Good job. I like that one. That's fun.
I just want to
Who's
say,
next?
by the way, the Matrix originally wasn't about them getting energy. It was the neural network.
Oh,
They're basically using the human's brains
for
for
learning,
for computational power. Yeah, not energy.
for
But
learning how to love.
but apparently that was too intellectual to the producers. They're like, no, let's change that to just, oh, energy's people produce energy. That's it.
Well, that's a shame, but at least it meant that Her wasn't plagiarism. So we got that great movie out of it too. Okay, who's next? What do you know? Do you know things? Why do you know them? How do you know them? What you got for me?
I can go.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that the ones that I came up with my group were also tautologies. So I just came up with a different one. That's ironically building off of the philosophy that the Matrix was loosely based on. But I suppose that mine would be that language is highly unstable.
You know that language is highly unstable. And how do you know that language is highly unstable?
So though we're able to communicate with each other in a way that might be knowable, i.e. as I say these things to you, you can perceive them and get a sense of what I am saying. Words change in their meaning, concepts change in their meaning over culture, over time. But also, even when we have more of a stable culture or have more of a stable meaning, that varies individually. So one thing I like to do is ask people what they think the word patriot means, like what comes to mind. Some people will say folks in the military, some people will say founding fathers, I'll say Edward Snowden. We all have a different, or some people will say a football team, like everyone will have a different conception, but we all think we agree upon the one thing, even though it can vary across things, but we all use these words thinking we're talking about the same thing and our conversation can function. But if you actually get down to the rudimentary basis of it, we all kind of have a different conception.
Okay. So what you know is that language is unstable because everyone has an individual understanding of the semantic set of relations that a particular word or set of phonemes or whatever are held together, or how they're supposed to relate and create like meaning. So that every mind has an individual sense of meaning, and we might contextually be able to use those sets of meanings to communicate reliably, but at best, it's a guessing game. Something like that? Okay, cool. So how do I disprove this one? I could do like problem of other minds. Your proposition that you know relies upon having knowledge. You're justifying your belief on the basis of what is going on privately in other people's minds. But the very belief itself supposes that you don't have access to those other minds. So what's to say that all of those other minds don't already completely get what you're saying, and they're just being subversive and critical, that, you know, like kind of schizophrenic paranoia that you're the only one that, you know, isn't in on the game, you know, that we don't have access to other minds. All we have is like, boop, you know, right there. And what access we do have is vague, opaque, and foggy. And it could very well be that the whole world is against you and we're all, you know, in on the joke. And when you say patriot, we get it, but, you know, sometimes we say, I mean a football team, and sometimes we say, we mean founding father, you know, whatever. And that's possible. It's very unlikely, but it's possible, right? And so reliance upon the subjective internal conditions of other minds is unstable, because we don't have access to those other minds in the same sort of way that we have access to our own minds. If we even have like good enough access to our own minds, that's dubitable too. And so any proposition, any belief that relies upon a stable kind of condition justifying truth about other minds is one that we ourselves don't have enough access to count as stable itself. How's that?
So not my rebuttal, but my question would then be, if I'm not making a speculation about other people's necessary subjective, like, no, I can't know what I don't know, whether it be someone else's consciousness, I have this anecdotal evidence, which is when asked, I can receive this information back, that it is differential. But also, if you're saying that there is this opaqueness, this vagueness, this ambiguity, that can go back and reify the point that the only way we get to transparently know things or find out things about ourselves or other subjectiveness is inherently opaque. It is vague. And the method of which we come to this for ourselves, for others, is communicatively.
So the knowledge is of the vagueness. Yeah, so the objection, like pedantic, again, is just that like the vagueness might only be on your end, right? And so you're the only one that sees it as foggy, and we're all out there. Again, a little solipsistic. But yeah, it's just like the possibilities is enough to say like, okay, yeah, I can doubt it. I probably shouldn't, because you're totally right. Language is vague, and it's amazing that we can do it at all. And we're all playing different language games. And some of us are more overlapped in each other's language games than others. But yeah, the fact of vagueness is not enough to suppose universally its truth. In fact, it's sort of a predicator against. All right, what else we got? What do you know? Do you guys in class want to say yours?
Still can't really think of a good one.
I thought the one you came up with was good. It'll at least be fun.
Okay.
I had time to think about it, so it's kind of cheating, but you know.
So I know this chair was created by humans, because if it weren't for human action, this chair would not exist.
Good. Did you guys hear that online? Yeah. Okay. So we know the chair exists because it you know, like, couldn't have been there without a human putting it. So the idea here is that there's a complex, articulate, and very formally rigid, just meaning like it's put together deliberately, or so it seems, object, and only humans can put these sorts of objects together like so. You don't find such objects in nature. So there's a difference between human artifact and natural artifact. Okay, so this one, I can do in a couple of ways too. How about this? Were you there when the chair was put there? Were you there when the chair was made?
No.
Have you ever been on the living room hike up here in the Wasatch? It's called the living room because you go and all the rocks are kind of set up like chairs overlooking the valley. It's kind of cool, right? Have you ever seen like the Planet Earth, you know, the David Attenborough BBC thing? Yeah, there's a cool little snippet in the Planet Earth where you get these flowers that grow in Australia. They're kind of orchid, and the orchid shapes itself. The flower organ shapes itself like a female wasp of a very specific species, and it emits a pheromone that the female wasp of the same species emits when it is like in heat, right, when it wants to mate. And so this is how the flower reproduces. This is how it spreads its genetic material from flower to flower. The male wasps will fly around, they'll sniff around and say, wow, that smells really good. I'm very attracted to you flower that I am convinced of is actually a female wasp. It will land on the flower. It will attempt to mate with the flower. It will not succeed, but the flower will have succeeded because it will have put its pollen on the bee that then goes to the next flower and pollinates, right? This is an incredibly intricate and complex articulate system that is designed almost what appears to be intelligently. Though, you know, evolution is a beautiful, powerful thing. But the idea is to say, look at this incredibly complex natural system that has designed itself without reason, but through the powers of natural selection to be very specifically set into a niche and a condition. Now, we could artificially create flowers that looked like it and, you know, serve the same function. And so this is the other way of doing it, not like that were you there, right? You didn't see a human put it there, you didn't see a human put it together. This is sort of the other half, which is to say, look, that the analogy, the disanalogy rather, that you presented between human artifact and natural artifact is based on a kind of formal rigidity, a kind of complexity in form and composition, can be mirrored in nature too. So this analogy breaks down. We can find things that look very intelligent that are in fact just natural, as well as we can find things that are very unintelligent that are artifacts in the human case. So this disanalogy breaks down, and it's hard to tell the difference between natural artifact and human artifact. And if it's hard to tell, then we don't have all the best reason all the time to say what's human and what's not. Sometimes things are put there on purpose, and sometimes they just occur randomly as a force of nature. And so without like true witnessing evidence of the fact of that chair being there, we have no real reason to say that it's not just wasn't naturally there. Another sort of way to break down this disanalogy between human and natural artifact is the philosophy of gardening. This is like a cool thing. Nobody ever talks about philosophy. There's a whole like why do we have lawns? You know, like why does everybody have green grass outside of their lawns in America? There's a philosophy behind this too. And there's a whole like political movement early on in the country where it was like based on, I think, like a French guy's conception of a universal park. And so the Americans picked up on it, and now we have like HOA jerks who tell us that we have to mow our lawns every week and whatever. You have to have, you know, like your Egyptian bluegrass in the front yard or else. And so there's this whole like concept of wherever you go, you're in the same park, and that's what America is supposed to be, kind of cool. Anyways, philosophy of lawns aside, in the 17 and 1800s. So like say you read like Jane Austen, right? And they go for a walk through the park of these big giant manor houses. If you watch like Downton Abbey, that kind of thing. These parks, so to speak, outside of these giant manor houses were very curated, but the fashion at the time was not to have like a beautiful curated park like say Liberty Park downtown in Salt Lake City, where you have all the giant cottonwood trees straight in a line with a path. You know, it's like humans put that together to make it pretty and cool. The fashion at the time in Europe was to curate gardens that gave every appearance of being wild and natural, but were in fact really intricately put together so that you could like navigate through them in a less formal and rigid way, that you were able to move through them in a way that felt like you were wandering through the wilderness, but you were never actually lost, right? So again, this is kind of what appears to be a natural artifact, a natural object that's really a human artifice. And again, this is to break down the disanalogy between the two. And if there is no reliable way to tell human artifact from natural artifact, and we weren't there in the inception of the object, then we're gonna have trouble, you know, knowing which is which and what's what. Okay, anybody else? What do we got? I think I have a chat message. James says, I think therefore I am. James, did you read? Is that how you know?
No, I just know that famous quote.
Well, if you didn't read, then how do you know?
Because I think, so therefore I know.
Thinking isn't enough for knowing. I can
To me
think
it
it's
is.
cold outside, but you know. All right,
No,
what else
it's
we got?
it's perfect temperature outside.
Yeah, likes the cold. I
I
can roll
will-
with that one. You know
will-
it's the perfect temperature outside? Meaning, like,
Yes.
for you, it's the perfect temperature outside? Okay, cool. So this is like a personal knowledge one. I think I have a note for this one. How about the Socratic way of going about things? When you say that it's the perfect temperature outside, can you tell me more about what you mean by perfect?
Ideal, like something that is preferable to any other temperature.
Yeah, so let's say the temperature outside is what, 30 degrees? And that's the perfect temperature? What about when you're eating dinner? Do you want your dinner to be 30 degrees? Is 30 degrees the perfect temperature for dinner?
For a second there, I thought you were saying 30 degrees Celsius. I'm like, wait, what? It's not hot outside.
No.
I mean, no, not for dinner or anything, but I would prefer something to be cold than burning hot.
You would prefer something to be cold than burning hot. In specific cases. So your preference is relative. And preferences change too, don't they? Sometimes we grow up only eating chicken nuggets and hot dogs, and then we find that there's a whole world of delicious cuisine out there, and chicken nuggets and hot dogs aren't actually all that great, right? preferences are unstable, and knowledge must be based on firm foundations. All right, let's do last chance. One more. Certainly you know things. So you thought.
You have a Mac, therefore you have failed. No, I'm just kidding.
I have a Mac, therefore I have failed. Usually I get like I know that something is a color or some mathematical knowledge. No, you guys are
What about
skipping straight to
something
the hard
like
stuff.
really basic, like 1 + 1 = 2?
Hey, there it is. Excellent. This is a really fun one. I'm glad you did it. So we'll end on this one. I know that 1 and 1 is 2 because 2 single units plus the rule of addition and the rule of equality give us 2 units, a single new object that we call 2, right? So you might say the successor of 0 in addition to another successor of 0 is equal to the successor of 0, meaning that 1 + 1 = 2. This is how you would like represent that logically. Okay, so again, a couple of ways to do this. One is to break down what we mean by truth. And another is to show that mathematics is not knowable. Which one do you want to do first?
That math isn't knowable.
Math isn't knowable. Okay, have you heard of Gödel?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so Gödel is this really cool early 20th century mathematician. I think he was like 1900s. He might have been late 1800s. Pretty sure he's 1900s. Yeah. So Gödel is a super dope mathematician, logician, who discovers what's called the incompleteness theorem. And he's like kind of a greasy, unknown graduate student who presents this view at a conference that nobody really listens to. There's like 3 people just talk. And slowly over time, it becomes a bigger and bigger issue. And the big mathematicians at the time like fight against it as hard as they can because it's very troubling because it breaks mathematics. It breaks everything that we know and feel and like are dogmatically attached to, right? The authority of mathematics. What can shake the authority of mathematics? Nothing. Except Gödel, this like greasy young graduate student who, is supposed to know nothing. Turns out it's all the authoritative dogmatic mathematician. So the idea of Gödel's incompleteness theorem is that any consistent formal system, call it F, right? So a consistent formal system is like we were talking about earlier when I gave all those like Greek letters, a set of axia that together give you, and like plus rules of inference, give you the ability to like do mathematics. Like when I said the successor of 0, successor of 0, and the equals successor, right? So like 1 + 1 = 2. Any set of axia that hold together consistently, that do not contradict themselves, are going to be incomplete. And what does it mean to be incomplete? It means that those axia cannot prove themselves, that they are set as universal basics, and there's no proposition derivable from those set of axia that you can infer back to the truth of the axia themselves, right? We talked about tautologies, that given the theory of incompleteness, that if you have a consistent system of which the axia do not contradict do not contradict themselves, no proposition derived from their interrelation, their inferential connections, can prove those axia non-tautologically. Which is to say that all mathematical systems, because all mathematical systems rely on basic axia, are incomplete. And so what you get, this would be like if you take like a 5,000 level logic class, you would get a description of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, you would get consistency, decidability, and incompleteness. So you can, it's sort of like as a student, you can choose social life, good grades, or sleep, and you can only have 2. Same idea with mathematical systems. You can have consistency, decidability, or completeness, and you only get 2 of them, right? Which 2 you choose is up to you. You're going to have an inconsistent system where axia contradict each other, but this allows you to have a complete and decidable system. or you have a consistent and decidable system that is incomplete, or a consistent decidable system, right? So the idea, again, is just like your basic axia cannot prove themselves. And so if we have a logic that allows us to do mathematics, that logic is going to be incomplete. The mathematics will be incomplete until we presuppose what's called a second order logic, a logic that stands apart from the original system and does like a meta proof of the original system. But what happens when we have this new second order logic is what justifies that. That second order logic is itself incomplete because it stands on its own axia as well. And so we need a third order logic and a fourth order logic, and thus we get the regression of justification as well. Should I do the other one? Yeah? No? Should we move on? What do you say? Move on or other proof against math? Okay, other proof against math. The other proof against math is to postulate or stipulate that mathematical objects are abstract and that the principle of truth by correspondence does not satisfy truth for abstract objects. Okay, so truth by correspondence, in the same sort of way that I described justified true belief as being kind of like the naive, but I think that brings in negative connotations. It's not naive, it's just sort of like simple, intuitive. When you think of what truth is, truth by correspondence is kind of like the representation of our basic intuitions about truth. Truth by correspondence, famously developed and discussed by Bertrand Russell, who we read in the first week of class. What Bertrand Russell says is, look, truth by correspondence says that for any proposition, any justified true belief, any belief claim, there will be there will be an object, there will be a sense within for the object, and then there will be a relation between the sense and the object itself. Okay, so the idea is if I say the cat is on the mat, this is a proposition. There's an object mat and there's an object cat. There's a sense, the relation of being on, right? The cat is on the mat, not the other way around. The sense, if I said the mat was on the cat, that would be a different sense of the same objects, right? So the sense is like how we order the objects of the proposition. So if I say the cat is on the mat is true, what makes this true? Well, it has to correspond to some actual fact in the world. There must be a cat on the mat, right? And if in the world there is a cat on the mat, and I've said there's a cat on the mat, the correspondence between the factual state of the world and the proposition is a relation of truth that holds between the two because the fact and the proposition correspond. Now, if we change the proposition around, I say the mat's on the cat, but in the world, the cat's on the mat, then the proposition is no longer true because you've shifted the sense. If I say I'm on the mat, but in fact the cat's on the mat, again, same issue, I've switched around the objects. There needs to be a precise correlation between the construction of your proposition, your belief statement, the objects and its sense to the actual world. And truth is this kind of corresponding relation. Okay, so how does this relate to disproving mathematics? This is probably like the most pedantic one yet, but the idea would be to say, where's the number one? Can you point to it? That's a finger. Where's plus? Those are two fingers. Yeah, okay, so the idea, you should sort of see it now, is that mathematical entities are abstract entities. There's no like physical feature of the world to which the object, abstract number one, right, corresponds, nor the rule of inference floating out there in the who knows where the heck ether. There's no rule of inference plus nor equals or whatever. These are mathematical symbols that we just sort of intuit into the world, but our intuitions are not enough to build this relation of correspondence. What we need for correspondence is a stronger relation between proposition and fact. Now, this, insofar as it's pedantic, we should be skeptical of this objection, and we should think that truth by correspondence is problematic in its sort of naive basic form. But for the sake of the exercise, there you go. Math broke. Okay. let me get back to our lecture then. So do you know things now or no? What do we know? Okay, cool. Cool. Can you guys can see the, am I still sharing the PowerPoint? Yeah, okay, cool. Good. Just get my windows back together. I like that game, it's fun. I enjoy it very much. Thanks for humoring me. Okay, so it turned out that you didn't know anything. Okay, so we're moving on to the meditations. First out, the senses. So the way the meditations go is that Descartes is going to go through 3 different kinds of doubt, and these methods of doubt, these like thought experiments, are going to be what wipes away the superstructure of his beliefs. So Descartes says, I can usually trust my sense knowledge. When I think that there's a chair right there, I'm usually right when I'm saying that there's a chair right there. But sometimes, turns out I'm deceived about some of the sensory experiences or senses that, like what the objects of my senses produce for me. So like when I put a stick in water, I sense that it appears bent, but I know it's not bent. So my senses are providing me faulty or unreliable information. My vision is saying, hey, this stick looks bent. Or when I turn right and I look at the mountains, I think, wow, those look really small. But it's because they're far away, not because they're actually small. My senses are giving me unreliable information, right? Yet although the senses occasionally deceive us with respect to objects which are very small or in the distance, there are many other beliefs about which doubt is quite impossible. So yeah, sure, senses sometimes give me false knowledge, but I don't doubt that I'm a multimodally verified sort of being. So like I exist, I have like a whole experience of existing. But this is like multimodally, meaning like I smell things and I taste things and I see things and I hear things and I feel things. I have proprioception. I understand like my embodiment in space, right? I have like a real material sense of existing. It's not just like my material sense of existing could be like the faulty stick bent in water. Like, no, that's just one sense kind of screwing me up. But if I like grab the stick and I touch it all the way down, I know that it's not bent. And so like my multimodal sensory experience can like confirm the fact that one of my senses is faulty, but the truth is actually I exist and it feels this way. So for example, I'm sitting here and I don't doubt that I'm sitting here yet by the fire, wearing a winter dressing gown, holding onto this piece of paper in my hands and so on. So we get a first doubt, which is that certain senses can give us unreliable knowledge, but well, like the reality of our existence sort of like more holistically, that doesn't seem to be as unreliable as a single individual sense. So the second doubt that's supposed to bring this kind of sense of reality into doubt is the dreaming doubt. So Descartes says, I know I'm aware because I'm having an experience of blank, sitting by the fire in this case. So what if I were asleep? Couldn't I be dreaming of having the experience of sitting by a fire, right? Like not everybody does, but sometimes we have like very vivid dreams. I had one of these the other day where I dreamt that I woke up and went through half my day and then I woke up and was very disappointed that I had to redo it all, right? And it felt so real. I was like kind of disoriented when I came out of this. It's like, do any of you guys have dreams like this, like weird, surreal experiences? Yeah, right? It happens. So in the dream, the world feels so real, so just like this, and then you're awake, right? So this is to draw doubt into that feeling of reality. It's not just a single sense that can be deceived, but all of our senses together can be held in a dream that isn't actually happening. And Descartes, patting himself on the back, a brilliant piece of reasoning, because he's the smartest man alive according to himself. Brilliant piece of reasoning. As if I were not a man who sleeps at night and regularly has all the same experiences while asleep as madmen do when awake. Indeed, sometimes even more improbable ones. How often asleep at night am I convinced of just such familiar events? That I am here in my dressing gown sitting by the fire, when in fact I'm lying undressed in bed. How risque. Yet at the moment, my eyes are certainly wide awake. When I look at this piece of paper, I shake my head and it is not asleep. As I stretch out and feel my hand, I do so deliberately, and I know what I'm doing. All this would not happen if with such distinctness to someone asleep. Indeed, as if I did not remember other occasions when I have been tricked by exactly similar thoughts while asleep. As I think about this more carefully, I see plainly that there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. The result is that I begin to feel dazed, and this very feeling only reinforces the notion that I may be asleep. So now he's like kind of convincing himself in the opposite direction, like, oh man, am I awake or am I asleep? I don't know what's real anymore. Somebody hand me some purple pills, whatever. I'm starting to feel a little dizzy. I'm losing my sense of
sleepwalking?
reality. Yeah, exactly. So again, what we're looking for is an unshakable belief. Is my experience as it is my sense of reality, my empirical sort of connection to the world about me, unshakable? Well, no, it turns out I could be dreaming it, right? And our skeptical arguments bulldoze away our experience as it is. Boom, there it goes. You see that? Boom, skeptical arguments. See you later, belief. So a reasonable conclusion from this might be that physics, astronomy, medicine, and all other disciplines which depend on the study of composite things are doubtful, right? So if I can doubt that I'm awake or asleep, that like my sense of empirical connection to the world, my sense of reality is dubious, then all of the different disciplines of science that rely upon this kind of reality are as well themselves dubious. So this is to be distinguished from arithmetic, geometry, and other subjects of the a priori sort, the sort that occur in our minds, the abstract kind, right? Which deal only with the simplest and most general things, regardless of whether or not they really exist in nature. These contain something certain and indubitable. For whether I am awake or asleep, 2 and 3 together are 5, and a square has no more than 4 sides. It seems impossible that such transparent truths should incur any suspicion of being false. So here we have a distinction made between, say, like mathematical, arithmetic objects and empirical objects that depend on a sense of reality. Whether or not I'm in a dream, there's no such thing as a squared circle, right? Squares, they're just impossible. We can't have them. We can maybe feel that they're there, but you couldn't actually perceive of a squared circle, whether in dreaming or in reality. So surely those sorts of truths, like geometric and arithmetic truths, can't be deceived. The dreaming doubt doesn't touch those kinds of truths. So we can doubt the senses and we can doubt reality, but there's still yet these sort of a priori inside the head abstract certainties like mathematical knowledge and geometric knowledge. So does math and stuff count as an unshakable belief? Well, says Descartes, I shall suppose that some malicious, powerful, cunning demon has done all he can to deceive me, rather than this being done by God, who is supremely good and the source of truth. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all the external things are merely dreams that the demon has contrived as traps for my judgment. I shall consider myself as having no hands or eyes or flesh or blood or senses, but as having been falsely deceived by all of these things. So this is the evil genius doubt. And there's the move before Descartes does the evil genius thing. He says, well, I'm a religious man and God wouldn't allow us to be deceived about such like certain truths as mathematical knowledge, but I will suppose for a moment that God doesn't exist, that there isn't such a perfect God out there. And instead there is this evil genius. So Descartes isn't saying that there's actually an evil genius. He's supposing it for the sake of argument, for the sake of setting up this foundation. He's stepping out of his system of beliefs for a moment. He's not denying any of them. He's just saying, look, I'm supposing because it's possible that this genius could exist. And this genius is the sort of thing that could make me believe that 2 and 3 are 5 when really they're 6, right? The evil genius, this evil demon, however it's translated, is the sort of being that is so powerful they could convince me of feeling so absolutely certain about the fact of some arithmetical piece of knowledge when the real truth of the nature hidden behind the veil that is obscured by the evil genius is out there, and it's different from what the evil genius has me believe. Okay, so the idea is, again, the evil genius is not something that he's truly supposing is out there, but it's a tool of the method of doubt to wipe away his old beliefs. So given the possibility of the postulate of the evil genius who can make us think that 2 and 2 are 4 when really 2 and 2 is 5. This allows us to eke in that tiny little bit of doubt for mathematical a priori knowledge. This sort of abstract knowledge that we can't help but to think, right? That insofar as the evil genius is possible, which is a minuscule possibility, though a possibility nonetheless, that same possibility raises an equal degree of doubt for mathematical beliefs. And remember, Descartes is looking for a foundation, no doubt, self-evidence, first principles. If there's any room for doubt, not good enough. Goodbye, math and stuff. So 3 doubts recapitulated. The sense doubt that the senses can be doubted, right, of course. The dreaming doubt that we can doubt scientific and empirical knowledge. And finally, the evil genius doubt, or the evil genus, as I've spelled it here, doubt, can doubt all knowledge, including a priori knowledge like mathematics. And so what's next? The cogito. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This is how Descartes, this is the first principle that Descartes comes to, that sets up his system of belief, that allows him to do mathematics and science to reestablish all of the truths that he had before, but this time without any of the bad apples, right? And before we go to the cogito, let's take 5 minutes, give you guys like a break from thinking and attending and rest the brain, and we'll come back. If you have to go, totally cool as well. I'm recording the lecture so we can catch up on the rest of it on YouTube, but we will resume in 5 minutes. I'll pause the recording too. So come back 5 minutes, have a drink, have a rest, smoke, whatever.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Welcome back to the cogito ergo sum. So other fun fact about the meditations, how they were composed. So back then in the day, all scientists and philosophers, any educated person spoke Latin, which is like kind of cool. There's like a universal academic language so that somebody from Spain could talk to somebody from France, could talk to somebody from Russia in Latin, and they would like hold conferences in Latin together. Very cool. I love this idea, where you can be from anywhere and share ideas about anything because we speak a common language of the intellect. It's just super ideal and fun. A little gatekeepy, but like what you lose in gatekeepiness, you get in accessibility for those in the system. So, pros and cons, but very cool romantic idea. Anyways, Descartes writes the meditations in both Latin and French, and the cogito ergo sum doesn't occur in the French. It's the Latin translation of this passage, and the translation that I gave you from English is from the French. So you get like, I think I am, rather than I think therefore I am. And also, fun thing about the meditations, Descartes wrote them and then sent them to like all of the really smart people he knew from all over Europe, and then had them give him objections, like tell me everything that's wrong with my meditations. And then he wrote responses. Like the meditations are like that big, and his responses are like that big. And he didn't publish meditations alone. He published the meditations and his response to all of the smartest people in the world, objecting to him and his responses to them. So this is like, wow, what a brilliant piece of reasoning. This is like Descartes' person. He's like very full of himself. He is like brilliant, but the hubris is large with this one. People don't do that today, really. Publish books with all of the smartest people objecting to them and then giving satisfactory responses to all of those objections. Fun fact. Anyways, cogito ergo sum. How do we overcome the evil genius doubt when we've doubted everything away? We've achieved what Descartes set out to do. That I want to doubt everything. I don't want to have any of these old beliefs. I want to have firm, solid foundations. And oh no, what have I done? I've actually achieved it. I can't believe mathematical truths. I can't believe the reality of my existence basically at all, nor can I believe anything that is processed through my senses. What is left? Oh God, oh no. Yesterday, and so this is now starting meditation 2, is another like literary moment. I think it's super beautiful. I love this moment. So as says Descartes, yesterday's meditation raised doubts, ones that are too serious to be ignored, which I can see no way of resolving. I feel like someone who has suddenly dropped into a deep whirlpool that tumbles around him, so that he can neither stand on the bottom nor swim to the top. However, I shall force my way up and try once more to carry out the project that I started on yesterday. I will set aside everything that admits of the slightest doubt, treating it as though I had found it to be outright false. And I will carry on like that until I find something certain. Archimedes said that if he had one firm and immovable point, he could lift the world with a strong enough lever. So too, I can hope for great things if I manage to find just one little thing that is solid and certain. And, spoiler alert, Cogito. Cool, like literary moment. It's good, beautiful reading. Okay, so the evil demon who controls our minds and deceives us leads us into doubt for everything. So like the evil genius doubt subsumes the dreaming doubt and subsumes the senses doubt. It's just sort of the ultimate reason to doubt everything. And so if we're going to have any firm foundation, that's the doubt that we need to contend with. What lets us get around this? So I will suppose then that everything is fictitious, given this evil genius. I will believe that my memory tells me nothing but lies. I have no sense, body, shape, extension, movement, and place. All of these are illusions. All of these are illusions placed into my mind by the matrix ruling machines that are using me for neural net nutrition or whatever the producers want to make more money. So what remains true? Perhaps just one fact that nothing is certain, that everything is vague, that there is no knowledge, that we are to be drowning in the whirlpool of doubt forever and ever, swirling to the bottom until we fill our lungs with water and give up life. So here's the argument. Premise one, to doubt all of the above is not to doubt universally. There could be some indubitable thing of which I have yet to realize. So Descartes doubts all of this stuff. There might be some further fact out there. I'm doubting everything that I have so far, but there might be something still yet unknown to me that is indubitable. So even though there is an evil genius, my doubt is not completely universal. It's not mathematically, as we might say, universal. It's more like empirically, given my experience, universal. Premise two, if I am the author of my own thoughts, then any further object of thought that I postulate remains susceptible to the evil genius doubt, insofar as my thinking is deceived universally. So the doubt itself is not universal, but it stands to reason that anything that I think, anything that passes through my mind also passes through the filter of corruption by the evil genius, and so itself would be dubitable. So there might be some indubitable fact out there, but whatever passes through my mind should be treated with the greatest apprehension. Therefore, I cannot think some further object which will remain free from doubt or deception. Whatever I think, whatever object of thought, whatever proposition I come up with, be it the cat on the mat or 2 + 2 = 4, is going to be troubled by the evil genius. But there's a second conclusion to draw from this, which is that there is something. And Descartes says it's the fact of my deception, that any object, any propositional belief, any statement of mind, of fact that passes through my mind is to be doubted. And that is something substantial. So, third premise, something cannot come from nothing. We should remember this as a proposition that Descartes posits as a basic sort of first principle. No creation ex nihilo, no creation from nothing. Therefore, given conclusion 2 and premise 3, the fact of deception implies the existence of a thing being deceived. That is the cause of deception, that I am a thing through which thoughts occur and those thoughts are being deceived. There is not, like these thoughts don't come from nowhere. They come from me because I exist and there's no creation ex nihilo. So there's always deception. There's always a locus of deception, an object through which this deception is passing and occurring. So says Descartes, even then, if he is deceiving me, I undoubtedly exist. Let him deceive me all he can. He will never bring it about that I am nothing. Will I think that I am something? So after thoroughly thinking the matter through, I conclude this proposition: I am, I exist, must be true whenever I think it or assert it. That you cannot be deceived without being a thing that can be deceived, right? There is no deception without both deceiver and the deceived. Descartes knows that no matter what he thinks, he will be deceived, but in deception, there's always thinking, there's always doubting, and there's a thing who thinks. There's a thing who doubts. I am, I exist, right? There I am. I am the thing being deceived. So again, the Latin, cogito, I think, ergo, therefore, sum, I am. So whenever you're thinking, whether it's correct or incorrect, there must be a thinker who's having those thoughts. And so the fact of a thinker, according to Descartes, is a solid ground to begin seeking knowledge. That doubting everything, one cannot doubt that one exists, because one must exist for doubt itself to exist at all. But how broad is the scope of the Cogito? What can we say when we say, like, I think, therefore I am? What are we allowed to prove with this little nugget of self-evidential true belief, this first principle of foundational knowledge? Can we say something like, I'm walking, therefore I exist? What do you think? Does the principle of reason that allowed Descartes to say, I am a thinking thing, or I think, therefore I am, also allow him to say, I'm walking, therefore I am?
I mean, if you think you're walking, then by that reason you should exist, right?
If you think you're good, okay, so this is right. This is different though, right? So the premise is I am walking, and what you suggest is I think I'm walking. And that this gets at the point, because I am walking is not enough. I'm walking is doubted by the dreaming doubt, right? That you could be dreaming that you're walking. But if you're thinking that you're walking, then the fact of your existence is not predicated on the walking itself, but on the thinking about the walking, which may itself be deceived, but there is thought, and there must be a thinker, right? So good. How about this one? What if I said Descartes is thinking, therefore Descartes exists? What do you think about this one?
I don't think that one holds true, because you don't know that Descartes is thinking.
Perfect. Yeah. So this one doesn't work either, because we don't know that Descartes, you only have access to what's in here, right? That I think I exist, and I could be deceived about anything else. Like you're another thing out in the world, and I only have access to this, and you might just be like a figment of the imagination impressed upon me by the evil genius. But what I know is that the figment of you in my imagination isn't out there. I'm being deceived, but there I am being deceived. I am in deception. Good. We can't be certain of others thinking, only our own. And so the Cogito at this stage of Descartes' Meditations is entirely private. And this isn't going to be enough. Like ultimately what Descartes wants to do is prove all of science, right? He wants to say the scientific method, this new way of discovering knowledge, is good for everybody. And so if the Cogito is just internal, then we need to make more steps towards universalizing it, making it external as well. So we're going a little late, so let's skip the what's wrong with the argument here. So Descartes says, after considering everything very thoroughly, I must finally conclude this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true whenever I put it forward by me or is conceived in my mind. But I do not yet have sufficient understanding of what this I is. What I've said that I exist, but what the heck do I mean by the I? When I say I am a thinking thing, well, this is what he's going to eventually say. When I say I think, therefore I am, what does the I consist in that I'm sure and indubitably exists? So I must be on guard against carelessly taking something else to be this I, and so making a mistake in the very item of knowledge that I maintain is the most certain and evident of all. Basically saying, like, I got to be careful about this. I'm not so sure that I can extrapolate upon this proposition of I am, I exist. But insofar as I do, I have to be really careful. So am I human? Well, no, I can't really say this is what I am. A human is an uncertain object. It's something that exists in reality. It's a concept that's based on my empirical presence in the world, dreaming tower. It's a problem. Am I a rational animal? Same problem. Like, what is rationality? It's a tricky concept. It's not grounded in just the fact of I am, I exist alone. So let me then, says Descartes, focus instead on beliefs that spontaneously and naturally came to me whenever I thought about what I was. So what he's, skip that part. The first of these is that I have a body. So am I like this body? And the second of these is that I have a mind. Am I this mind? When I say what am I? Well, I'm this thing, right? And here's where we get the first inkling of Descartes' dualism. Remember Parmenides from last week who said, like, it all exists, it's all one thing, there's no change, right? It is or it is not, it is and it is not. Descartes postulates a substance dualism, where there's two kinds of substance in the world. And we won't go into this, it's a metaphysics class, but it's important to know. Descartes thinks that there's mental substance and there's physical substance, and that somehow ghost and the machine, spooky relations, they interact with one another. And this is just sort of the first inklings of Descartes' dualism. But now I am supposing there is a supremely malicious deceiver who has set out to trick me in every way he can. Now what shall I say I am? Well, it can't be body or presence. Again, like I could just be deceived into thinking I have a body. Therefore, at last I've discovered it. Thought. Thinking is the one thing that cannot be separated from me. I am, I exist, this is certain. But for how long? How long is it certain that I am, I exist? Well, it's only for as long as I'm thinking. Strictly speaking then, I am simply a thing that thinks, a mind, or a soul, or an intellect, or reason. Meaning that whatever passes through my mind, whenever it's passing through my mind, whenever there is the mental substance of thought present, there is also the I present through whom that thinking is occurring. Therefore, says Descartes, I am at least a thinking thing. And here we begin to see the very basic presence of superstructure beginning to develop itself, right? We have the I think, therefore I am a cogito, and then we have I am a thinking thing, right? And from this foundation, there is an indubitable presence of justification held between these two propositions. And we're going to start to see more and more of these building blocks laid upon the ground of that cogito foundation, which will eventually become all empirical science. So if I'm a thinking thing, what does that entail? Objects of my imagination. You can imagine yourself to be any number of things. So the objects of my imagination rely upon my having experienced forms of those objects before, which is out in the world, which we haven't proved yet. So I can't claim to be an object of my imagination, but I can surely be a thing that imagines, right? A thinking thing imagines, and imagination is a part of thought. I might not be the object of my imagination, but at least the imagination itself is a part of what I am. So is doubt, understanding, affirmation, denial, wanting, refusing, imagining, and seeming to perceive the world, right? All of this mental stuff, these are all different mental attitudes, pro-attitudes about how we experience the world through thought. And so what Descartes says when he says, I am a thinking thing, I am a thing who thinks in these particular sorts of ways, right? And this is sort of the beginning of what constitutes what I am. It is the same I who senses or is aware of the bodily things seemingly through the senses. Because I may be dreaming, I can't say for sure that I now see the flames of the fire that's before me, hear the wood crackling and feel the heat of the fire, but I certainly seem to hear, to be warned. And this can't be false, the fact that it seems to me this way. So what is called sensing is strictly just this seeming. And when sensing is understood in this restricted sense of the word, it too is simply thinking. So through thinking alone, Descartes is going to begin to derive certain facts about the body. So first, something can't come from nothing. Second, I'm a thinking thing. And third, we're going to find out that the body is extension. These are going to be like the three foundational principles upon which we get a Cartesian and material science that we've been, like inspires Newton and everybody until Einstein, basically. And this is where we get the candle wax experiment. Okay, so what is the candle? Well, it has a certain taste. It seems to me to taste kind of like honey, a little waxy. It has a smell, burning, sort of melty and waxy and to touch, glabrous, you might call it. It looks a certain way. It's long, cylindrical. It's on fire. And it has a certain shape. It's formed in the world in a particular way. It has physical properties until it melts, right? So the candle tastes a certain way until it melts, and then it tastes like burnt ash. It has a smell until it smells like nothing because it's a melted pile. When you touch it before it's melted, it's hard, but after it's melted, it's soft. It looks nothing like it did before and has a completely different shape, right? So the candle changes substantially in all of the ways that it seems to be. And yet, it appears to be the same thing. When I look at it, I say that's the same candle it was before, even though everything about its sensation through which I experience the candle to be has changed. But what exactly is this thing that I'm now imagining? Right now it's like melted candle. Well, if we take away whatever doesn't belong to the wax, what is left is merely something extended, flexible, and changeable. I'm forced to conclude that the nature of the piece of wax isn't revealed by my imagination, my sensation of what it looks like, but is rather perceived by my mind alone. It is by pure scrutiny of the mind that the wax's extension and body is made clear and distinct to me. So what Descartes is saying here is, look, the way that the wax changes, it confuses all of my senses, but what remains the same is that I know, I perceive mentally that there's this like magical connection from mind to body that says that is the same piece of wax as it was before, even though everything sensible about it has changed. And this is to say that what remains the same about body is its extension, that it has a certain space in existence that it takes up, and that my mind just perceives it directly and knows that the space that that takes up is the same that it did before, and that regardless of its sensible change, the extension remains the same. And this is supposed to be our third principle of a certain fact, our third set of foundational first evidential principles. So body's extension, and bodies are judged by the mind, right? Not just by the body, as extended by the mind alone. And here's where we get clear and distinct ideas. This will be like the last set of slides that we do for tonight. The rest of Descartes' project, you can learn if you take like a Descartes class or early modern class. Lex Newman is awesome. He's our guy that does that here. But we'll get to clear and distinct ideas because this is what we need for building the rest. And we can, sort of infer how the rest of the project goes. So it is by pure scrutiny of the mind alone that the wax's extension in body is made clear and distinct to me. And this is a really important part for Descartes' epistemology, is foundationalism, this idea of clear and distinct. That every one of these three principles that he said so far, he would describe as clear and distinct, as having what he calls like the natural light of illumination shine upon them, which is not to say that they're true, but just that anytime he thinks them, he can't help but to affirm their truth. That regardless of the existence of the evil demon, the evil genius deceiving him, he can't help but to say, it's true that 2 and 2 is 4. It's true that I'm a thinking thing. It's true that something can't come from nothing. I might be deceived, but my mind is incapable of thinking otherwise. So an idea is clear and distinct insofar as any time that idea presents itself before you under all rational scrutiny, under the complete weight of total doubt, I still cannot doubt these propositions. This is what a clear and distinct idea is for Descartes. So what I see might not really be the wax. Perhaps I don't have eyes. The evil genius makes me think I have eyes and I don't, with which to see anything. But when I see, or I think I see, it is simply not possible that I, who am now thinking, am not something I think, therefore I am. Similarly, that I exist follows from other bases for judging that the wax exists, that I touch it, that I imagine it, or any other basis. And similarly, for my basis for judging that anything else exists outside of me. As I came to perceive the wax more clearly and distinctly by applying not just sight and touch, but other considerations, the judgment of the mind. All this too contributed to my knowing myself even more distinctly, because whatever goes into my perception of the wax or any other body must do even more to establish the nature of my own mind. So what Descartes is saying here is, look, I'm a thing who thinks. And through that power of thinking, the connection of perception, judgment, I can bridge the gap from the internal thinking perceptive stuff to the actual world. And it's a pretty simple, like two-dimensional view, just that the world is full of extended objects. And I know no difference between them. I just know that the world is full of extended objects. But still, that's a connection that bridges us out from mind to world. And I can know, I don't know if I have eyes or if I have ears or if I have a mouth, but I know that I'm not just a thing of things, but I'm also a thing that's extended. And again, dualism, right? The mental substance, the thinking stuff, perception, seeming, desiring, whatever, and the mental substance, the extension. So now that the sense of self is becoming a little bit more robust. So a clear and distinct object of thought is one that can be known with the same certainty as I think I exist, right? And bodies extended, something can't come from nothing, are clear and distinct ideas. And it seems that I think I exist is not the only object of thought that's clear and distinct. Body's extension, something can't come from nothing. But just because we have clear and distinct ideas doesn't mean we know them yet, right? So I can't help but to affirm their truth, even under the weight of complete and total doubt. But this doesn't give me knowledge yet. It still needs to be true. So what gives us truth? A clear and distinct idea is simply the sort of judgment that we're unable to doubt when we think it. And certainty is not knowledge. I can be absolutely, completely, totally 100% certain that my legal name is Billy Bob, but turns out I was hit on the head and I just forgot my name is Spencer, right? And so certainty doesn't equal knowledge. I can be totally wrong about something I feel completely certain about because written on my birth certificate is the name Spencer, right? So clear and distinct ideas, though they are certain ideas, do not yet ascend to the level of knowledge for Descartes. And the missing piece of the puzzle is going to be God. And this is what happens in the rest of the meditations. So just to give you like, in the nutshell, brief overview, what Descartes does is he gives a proof for God, an ontological proof for God, that we will look at in like 5 or 6 weeks when we do the 3 classical proofs for God's existence. And Descartes says that the proof for God's existence is also a clear and distinct idea. And if the proof for God's existence is a clear and distinct idea, then God exists. And if God exists, then God would not, being the omnibenevolent, all good, all powerful being that God is, would not allow an evil deceiver to deceive me about the things that are clear and distinct, because that would be pretty nasty and evil. Therefore, I'm not deceived about the things that are clear and distinct. Therefore, they are knowledge, and things that are clear and distinct are things that are proven by science and mathematics and all this fun peer-reviewed stuff. Therefore, I get all of the rest of my old stuff without any of the bad stuff, and I know beliefs, that is, and I know what standard those beliefs need to live up to in order to fit within the conceptual system that rests upon the foundation of the Cogito ergo sum foundation, right? Which is just that they are clear and distinct, indubitable when I think about them, and they are proven with rigid, justified fact that is all related back to those 3 foundational principles. So that's like the rest of the meditations. What we're going to do in the next 2 weeks is investigate this question of who am I? So Descartes says, I think I am, I exist, but what is this I don't really know quite what it is. When we say I'm going to the store or I'm thinking, right? What are we referring to? Who is that person? What is it consistent? It's a whole field and branch of philosophy. It's really interesting and fun. And that's what we'll be thinking about for the next 2 weeks. We're building on Descartes' question. Be warned that next week's reading is reported by students in semesters past to be hard. It's really fun. It's cool. John Locke is a super dope philosopher who invents the philosophy of personal identity, basically. But he writes in kind of like an old English style, so it can be kind of codgy and hard to get into, but he uses fun examples, and it's a really cool reading that the ideas are simple, the expression is a little bit less simple. So do your best. Next week, we'll look at Locke and bodily continuity and psychological continuity and talk about self, and then in 2 weeks, we'll talk about there being no such thing as self. So yeah, I've kept you a little bit long this time. Thanks for sticking with it, and see you next week.